Imagine this. You're sitting across from someone you care about deeply. Maybe it's a partner, a friend, a family member, and once again, you're swallowing your truth. You feel the heat rise in your chest, the words press against your throat, like prisoners begging for release. But you smile instead. You nod. You tell them it's fine, even though something inside you is quietly dying. Now imagine this has been happening for years. You compromise your needs to keep the peace. You silence your discomfort to avoid being difficult. You give and give and give until your identity starts to erode, until you're not sure where your boundaries begin or end. You convince yourself that this is kindness, that you're being a good person, that sacrificing yourself is noble. But beneath the surface of that gentle exterior, something else begins to grow. Resentment, exhaustion, a quiet despair. And still, you keep smiling. Carl Jung once warned of the dangers of being too good. He wasn't praising cruelty, nor celebrating selfishness. He was revealing a deeper psychological truth that when the persona of niceness becomes a mask, it doesn't just protect others from discomfort. It shields you from authenticity. And over time, that mask fuses with your face. You forget who you were before you started hiding behind it. You become agreeable to the point of erasure. But here's the paradox. The world tells you this is virtue. You're rewarded for being accommodating, applauded for being easygoing. You're told that niceness is synonymous with decency, maturity, even spiritual evolution. But what if that's a lie? What if, buried inside your constant yes-saying and people-pleasing, is a slow, invisible self-destruction? Jung wrote extensively about the shadow, the hidden, repressed aspects of the self. Anger, assertiveness, desire, power, all those qualities that don't fit the image of nice. He believed that repressing the shadow leads to psychological fragmentation, that we become divided from our wholeness and worse, vulnerable to manipulation. So here's the unsettling question. What if your kindness is actually a defense mechanism? What if your politeness is a prison? What if the very traits you thought made you lovable are the ones that are keeping you small, broken, and endlessly exploited? You say yes when you want to scream no. You avoid conflict at all costs, even when silence costs your sanity. You shoulder the burdens of others while yours go unnoticed, unspoken. You rationalize it by calling yourself empathetic, but deep down, you suspect something is wrong. Because it's not just tiredness you feel, it's the ache of your unlived life. How did we come to believe that martyrdom is moral? That suppressing our truth is synonymous with being lovable? What cultural myths shaped this illusion? What psychological wounds made us think that disappearing ourselves would bring us closer to happiness? And who benefits from your niceness? Really? There is a secret war happening beneath your smile, a war between your authentic self and the persona you've built to survive. Jung called this the danger of over-identifying with the persona, the socially accepted mask we wear to navigate the world. But when the persona becomes your identity, your true self fades into shadow. You begin to feel ghost-like, even in a crowded room. You nod while they talk. You agree while they take. You apologize for things you didn't do. You smile as you bleed. And the worst part, most people will never notice, because you've been trained to make your suffering invisible, to present your pain in pretty packaging, to never make anyone else uncomfortable, even if that means living in discomfort yourself. But there comes a moment, a cracking point, when the soul can no longer tolerate the lie. When you wake up one day and realize that being nice has not protected you. It has exposed you. It has not won you love. It has attracted users. It has not led to peace. It has brought quiet war. And then a haunting thought arises. What if all this time, your niceness was the very thing destroying you? What if the very traits you relied on for survival are the ones keeping you from truly living? This is not a call to become cruel. It's an invitation to reclaim your depth, to understand the cost of compulsive kindness and the psychology behind why it happens. It is time to explore the roots of the disease Jung saw spreading beneath the surface of the well-behaved psyche. Because until you see the shadow behind your smile, you'll never be free. Now, let's uncover the hidden problem where it all begins and why it runs so deep. Carl Jung once observed that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls, and few things illustrate this more vividly than the compulsion to be endlessly nice. Behind the polished mask of politeness lies a silent terror, the fear of rejection, abandonment, or disapproval. It's not just a behavioral trait, it's a psychological defense. A survival strategy wired deep into the psyche, often forged in the vulnerable years of childhood. But to understand how this tendency takes root and why Jung saw it as dangerous, we have to explore the architecture of the self and how it fragments under the weight of unexpressed truth. The birth of the persona Jung introduced the concept of the persona as the outward-facing mask each of us creates to navigate society. It is necessary. Without it, we couldn't function in groups, form relationships, or maintain social roles. But when this persona becomes rigid, when we begin to believe that we are the mask, the true self begins to disappear into the unconscious. The nice persona is one of the most seductive. It earns approval. It avoids punishment. It keeps chaos at bay. But where does it come from? Often from early environments where love was conditional. Perhaps you were only praised when you were compliant, criticized when you were assertive, silenced when you expressed negative emotions. Slowly, you learned, if I want to be loved, I must not cause discomfort. I must not be difficult. I must be good. The child does not question these rules. The child adapts to survive. Over time, that adaptation becomes identity. But something essential gets lost in the process: your instinct, your honesty, your emotional truth, the very traits that make you whole and real. Nietzsche, Jung, and the tragedy of repression. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this danger long before the age of modern psychology. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he warned of the last man, the docile, obedient soul who chooses comfort over greatness, agreement over authenticity. They have left the regions where it is hard to live, he wrote. For one needs warmth. This is the psychic condition of the too nice person, a compulsive warmth that suffocates fire, a moral posture that kills instinct, a pseudo-virtue that hides a deep psychological wound. Carl Jung echoed this sentiment with sharper focus. He argued that the unintegrated parts of the psyche, the shadow, do not simply vanish. They gather strength in the unconscious, distorting our behavior in subtle, often destructive ways. When you repress anger, it leaks out as passive aggression. When you repress desire, it mutates into envy. When you repress assertiveness, it transforms into chronic anxiety or guilt. Niceness, then, becomes a disguise, not just for others, but for yourself. You tell yourself you're being kind, but often you're avoiding conflict. You tell yourself you're being compassionate, but often you're afraid of being seen as selfish. You tell yourself you're being good, but deep down you're terrified of being bad. Jung believed that integrating the shadow, acknowledging and accepting the darker aspects of the self, was essential to true wholeness. Without it, the psyche remains divided, neurotic, and prone to projection. The culture of pleasantness, Western society, has elevated pleasantness to the status of moral imperative. From childhood, we're taught to smile, to share, to not interrupt, to say please and thank you. On the surface, These are social niceties. But beneath them lies a deeper conditioning: be likable or be alone. This isn't just psychological, it's cultural. Author and social critic Aldous Huxley warned of a society lulled into submission through comfort and conformity. In Brave New World, people are engineered to be pleasant, agreeable, and utterly disconnected from their deeper desires. Discomfort becomes taboo. Suffering is medicated. Anger is pathologized. And passion, too messy, too wild, too real. Sound familiar? We have pathologized emotional truth and rewarded emotional repression, especially in women who are disproportionately told to be nice. Don't be bossy. Don't be too much. But men, too, face their own brand of emotional strangulation, pressured to be agreeable providers, emotionally selfless, conflict avoidant. And so, we learn to fake harmony. We live in what philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre might call bad faith, a refusal to accept the full freedom and responsibility of being truly human. We surrender to roles and scripts that keep us comfortable and quietly dead inside. Niceness as a moral camouflage. It is no coincidence that some of the most manipulative or controlling people wear a mask of extreme niceness. Because niceness, when weaponized, becomes a form of control, a tool to maintain order, avoid rejection, and appear morally superior. Jung warned that those who claim to be only good are often the most dangerous. Why? Because they lack shadow awareness. They do not see the wolf in themselves, so they project it onto others. These are the people who say, "I'm just trying to help," while slowly undermining your autonomy. The ones who smile as they manipulate, who avoid direct conflict but breed passive aggression. True morality, Jung believed, is not about appearing good. It's about becoming whole. That requires a confrontation with the messy, raw, and often inconvenient parts of ourselves, the ones that don't fit in a polite society. And this confrontation is terrifying because it means shedding the false identity you've built. It means risking rejection. It means becoming real. The high cost of inauthentic harmony. If you're constantly performing niceness, you never learn who you truly are beneath it. Your relationships become fragile, built on performance rather than presence. You attract people who love your mask, but cannot see your soul. And worse, you begin to fear your own depth. You begin to associate honesty with conflict, power with guilt, truth with loneliness. But here's the deeper tragedy. The world loses access to your real gifts. Your anger could have been a boundary. Your sadness could have inspired compassion. Your assertiveness could have reshaped your destiny. But niceness buried it all. And the longer you stay buried, the more lost you feel. Because it's not just that you're too nice. It's that you've mistaken the performance of goodness for the experience of wholeness. And until you name this lie, you'll keep repeating it, smiling through pain, apologizing for your needs, disappearing behind your own eyes. But what if you could rebel? What if you could unlearn the lie that goodness means self-erasure? What if there's a way to reclaim your soul, not by becoming cruel, but by becoming real? Let's go there. Now we confront the unseen consequences, the silent ways this pattern shapes your life and the world around you. There is a particular kind of loneliness that cannot be named. It doesn't come from being alone in a room or cut off from others. It comes from being surrounded by people who don't truly see you because you've never truly shown them who you are. And this is one of the deepest, most tragic consequences of compulsive niceness. You become invisible in your own life, not because others ignore you, but because you've trained them not to notice, not to question, not to ask. You've built a fortress out of smiles and silence, and now you live inside it, alone, applauded, perhaps, admired for your grace, your warmth, your patience, but starving, psychologically starving. The illusion of safety. Let's return to the inner architecture for a moment. When your entire personality orbits around keeping others happy, your sense of self becomes externally anchored. You begin to derive your worth from the approval of others, and any form of tension, even a moment of disapproval, can feel like existential danger. This is not just emotional, it's neurological. Your brain, especially if shaped by early trauma or neglect, begins to associate confrontation with threat. Even mild conflict can trigger the amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for fight or flight responses. For the too nice person, saying no doesn't just feel rude, it feels dangerous. So you say yes instead, even when it costs you, even when you know you're betraying yourself. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. You become increasingly allergic to discomfort. Your threshold for tension lowers. You over-apologize. You second-guess your every word. You obsess over how others might feel. And eventually, you begin to fear your own emotions because they threaten to disrupt the fragile peace you've worked so hard to maintain. But peace without truth is not peace. It is paralysis. The disease of disconnection. Carl Jung once warned that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. In other words, when we avoid the pain we need to feel, when we bypass our anger, silence our grief, suppress our truth, that pain doesn't vanish. It mutates. It shows up as anxiety, as depression, as physical illness, as spiritual emptiness. One of the most common complaints among chronically nice people is chronic exhaustion. Not just physical tiredness, but soul fatigue. A sense of emptiness, like you're constantly leaking energy, but can't figure out why. You're exhausted not because you're doing too much, but because you're not doing what is true. You're exhausted from carrying the weight of unspoken needs, unexpressed boundaries, unresolved emotions. Exhausted from pretending, from nodding, from smiling when you want to scream. This kind of exhaustion is not cured by sleep. It is only cured by truth. And yet, our culture rarely makes space for that kind of healing. Instead, we call it burnout. We offer surface-level advice: take a vacation, practice self-care, be more positive, but the real issue isn't surface level at all. It's existential. When you spend your life avoiding conflict, you create it within yourself. The social cost of niceness. Let's zoom out. This isn't just a personal issue, it's a collective one. In a world where being agreeable is prized above being authentic, entire systems emerge that reward silence and punish dissent. Workplaces become breeding grounds for passive aggression. Families become emotional echo chambers. Friendships become shallow, transactional, devoid of depth. Even romantic relationships suffer. The nice partner may seem ideal at first, but eventually, their lack of honesty creates distance, confusion, and resentment. Authentic relationships require friction. Not constant drama, but truthful tension. The willingness to challenge each other, to disagree, to bring shadow into light. Without that, love becomes performance. Connection becomes codependency. And in the political and cultural arena, this pattern becomes even more dangerous. When entire populations are taught to be nice above all else, tyrants thrive. Abuse goes unchallenged. Injustice becomes normalized. Jung warned that evil does not always come in the form of monsters. It often wears a smile. It often speaks softly. It often comes disguised as order, civility, and good intentions. To be too nice in the face of injustice is not moral, it is complicity. The loss of the sacred. No, Here is a quiet tragedy. Many nice people go through life never learning how to say a sacred no, a no that affirms their values, a no that protects their time, their energy, their soul, because they confuse rejection with cruelty. But no is not violence. It is a boundary. It is a declaration. I know myself. I know what I can hold and what I cannot. Without the sacred no, your yes means nothing because it's not a choice. It's a compulsion. And others feel this. Even if they can't articulate it, people sense when your kindness is not grounded in strength, but rooted in fear. They may respect you less. Or worse, they may exploit you. Because here's a brutal truth. Not everyone deserves your kindness. Not everyone will treat your softness with reverence. Some will see it as an opening, a resource, a tool. And if you have no boundaries, they will take and take and take until you're emptied. This is how good people become bitter. Not because they were wrong to be kind, but because they were taught to be kind at the expense of their wholeness. A life half lived. Perhaps the most devastating consequence of compulsive niceness is this. You don't get to live your life. You live the life others expect. You make choices that keep others comfortable. You walk paths that others paved. You silence dreams that seem too selfish. You betray desires that don't fit the script. And one day, you wake up, and you don't recognize yourself. You've spent so long adjusting, conforming, making room for others that you've forgotten what it feels like to take up space, to feel rage, to feel passion, to speak without a script. This is not life. This is a performance. And deep down, you know it. The symptoms are everywhere. The chronic anxiety, the fear of judgment, the haunting sense that something inside you is unfinished. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Because the very forces that conditioned you to be nice, to be small, silent, selfless can be unlearned, transcended, transformed. But only if you are willing to break the rules you are taught to worship. Only if you are ready to face the shadow you are told to hide. Only if you are brave enough to say, I will no longer betray myself to be loved. And once you make that decision, everything begins to change. Now, let's step into the rebellion, the radical path of reclaiming your truth and living from the fire of your soul. Something ancient awakens the moment you say your first real no. It doesn't roar. It doesn't thunder. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. Instead, it rises quietly, like a spine straightening after years of slouching. A still, centered force, the you beneath the performance. That no is not defiance for its own sake. It is a return, a coming home. Because every time you deny your truth in the name of being nice, you abandon the temple of your own soul. And every time you reclaim it through honesty, through boundaries, through fire, you begin the rebellion Jung spoke of, the rebellion of individuation. Not rebellion against others, but rebellion against the false self, the death of the false self. To free yourself from the tyranny of niceness, you must be willing to kill something sacred. Not your kindness, not your compassion, but your attachment to being seen as good. Because that is what truly enslaves you, not morality itself, but your addiction to being perceived a certain way. Your ego's craving for approval. The identity you crafted so carefully to keep you safe, to keep you liked, to keep you belonging. Jung called this process individuation the path of integrating all parts of the self, including the ones we've repressed, denied, or exiled. The angry self, the selfish self, the ambitious self, the sexual self, the wild self. To integrate them is not to let them run rampant. It has to stop pretending they don't exist. You can't be whole by being good. You become whole by being real. And that requires the courage to be disliked, the courage to be misunderstood, the courage to say, "This is who I am," even when others recoil. That's not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. That's liberation, from pleasing to presence. Here's the strange thing. When you stop trying to be liked, you become truly lovable. Because people don't connect with your perfection, they connect with your presence, with your edges, with your willingness to be flawed, messy, and honest. Think of the people who move you most. Are they the most agreeable, the most polished, or are they the ones who speak from the soul, without pretense? Niceness seeks comfort. Authenticity seeks truth. You must choose. The first step in breaking free is to slow down every moment where you feel the automatic urge to please. Catch it. Hold it. Ask yourself, is this coming from fear or love? Don't try to change everything overnight. Begin with micro-rebellions. Decline an invitation without guilt. Disagree with someone gently, clearly. Say what you actually want for dinner. Sit in silence instead of filling space with false laughter. Let someone be disappointed in you and don't rescue them from it. Each of these small acts reprograms the nervous system. Each is a stone in the foundation of your new self. You are not abandoning others. You are finally refusing to abandon yourself. Embodying the sacred no. The sacred no is more than just refusal. It is a declaration of self-ownership, a reclamation of psychic territory. It does not need to be loud. It can be whispered, but it must be true. When you say no to being overextended, you say yes to rest. When you say no to emotional manipulation, you say yes to clarity. When you say no to chronic self-sacrifice, you say yes to dignity. These are not selfish acts. They are spiritual ones. And yes, there will be fallout. Some people will resist your change. After all, they benefited from your silence. They counted on your flexibility, your guilt, your self-erasure. Don't be surprised when they accuse you of being cold, mean, difficult. Let them. That reaction is not a reflection of your cruelty. It is the sound of a boundary being born. The inner alchemy of anger for many nice people. Anger is the most terrifying emotion of all. It's been demonized, shamed, exiled. But Jung believed that anger, when integrated consciously, is a source of transformation. Unconscious anger is toxic, but conscious anger is sacred. It clarifies. It protects. It restores dignity. It says, I will not be used. I will not be erased. I matter. To access this anger is not to become volatile, it is to become whole. It is to allow the heat of truth to burn away your false allegiances. Start small. Journal your resentments. Speak them aloud to yourself. Give your inner fire a safe space to rise. And when it feels ready, channel it not as destruction, but as creative force. Rage, too, has wisdom, if you listen. From niceness to fierce compassion. Here's the final shift. Breaking free from niceness doesn't mean becoming harsh or cruel. It means replacing people-pleasing with fierce compassion for others. Yes, but especially for yourself. Fierce compassion is not sentimental. It is clear-eyed. It says, I see your suffering, and I will not enable it. I will not lie to you. I will not betray my truth for your comfort. It is the compassion of the warrior, the healer, the boundary holder. Real compassion begins with presence. And you cannot be present if you're constantly performing. This rebellion is not a rejection of kindness. It is a rejection of false kindness. It is not a turn toward selfishness. It is a return to self-respect. It is the end of the emotional contortion that kept you small, anxious, and silently burning out. And it is the beginning of something powerful. Because when you stop living as who others want you to be, you begin to live as who you truly are. And that self, the unmasked, unedited, undiluted self, is what the world is dying to see. But don't take this on faith. Feel it. The next time you pause before saying yes out of guilt, ask yourself, am I shrinking right now or expanding? The next time someone crosses a line, ask, what part of me have I been taught to abandon here? And when your voice shakes as you speak the truth, remember, this is the sound of the mask cracking, of the soul awakening, of the false self dying and the real one being born. This is the rebellion Jung called us toward, the inner revolution that restores us to ourselves. But even rebellion is not the end. There is something deeper, a final truth buried beneath all the masks, all the wounds, all the noise. Let us go there now to the ultimate realization that changes everything. What if the self you've been trying to perfect was never meant to exist? What if the real you, the one beneath the kindness, beneath the politeness, beneath the self-sacrifice, was not something to improve or fix, but something to remember? That's the final, haunting realization Jung pointed us toward. You're not here to become good. You are here to become whole. And wholeness has nothing to do with being liked. Wholeness includes everything: your love and your rage, your brilliance and your jealousy, your light and your darkness. It is a mosaic of contradictions, a sacred paradox. And when you chase only goodness, only niceness, only approval, you amputate parts of your own soul. You become palatable, but no longer real. You become safe, but no longer alive. Because the deepest truth is this: niceness is often a disguise for fear. But authenticity is divinity made visible. Jung once said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who your parents wanted you to be, not who society rewarded, not even who you imagined when you were trying to be better, but who you are when there's nothing left to prove, nothing left to hide, nothing left to protect. That self, the one that is raw, unpolished, honest, is sacred. And if you never meet that self, if you live your whole life hiding behind masks, you may win the world's approval, but lose your soul in the process. The soul's longing is not for niceness, it's for integrity. Integrity does not mean moral superiority. It means integration, a stitching together of the fragmented parts of yourself, the parts you exiled to be liked, the parts you judged to be too much, the parts you are taught to fear. And here is the paradox: only by embracing your inner darkness can you truly walk in light. This is why shadow work is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Because without it, your niceness will always be conditional. It will always have an unconscious agenda. It will always be a mask. But when you make peace with your shadow, when you embrace your full humanity, then kindness becomes something else entirely. It becomes powerful, grounded, true. It is no longer the softness of fear. It is the strength of presence. That kind of kindness does not avoid truth, it speaks it. It does not shrink from conflict, it navigates it. It does not sacrifice itself to be loved, it loves from a place of self-possession. And it changes everything. The nicest people are often the ones who never got to be themselves. They were praised for being easy, obedient, quiet, for not making waves, for being low maintenance. But do you know what's really behind that mask? A wild, creative, unruly soul. A soul that was taught to make itself small in order to be safe. And that soul is still there, waiting for you to stop negotiating your existence, waiting for you to stop asking for permission, waiting for you to say, enough. This is the moment when something shifts not in theory, but in the marrow of your being. When you realize you are never meant to be a watered-down version of yourself. You are never meant to be endlessly agreeable, endlessly forgiving, endlessly available. You are meant to burn with truth. You are meant to take up space. You are meant to walk into a room and not be liked by everyone, because some people will be confronted by your light. And that is not your problem. That is their mirror. And you no longer need to dim your radiance to soothe their wounds. You no longer need to contort your truth to avoid their discomfort, because something in you has come alive. Something that refuses to go back to sleep. There is no healing without self-betrayal. Ending, read that again. Every time you abandon your truth, you wound yourself. Every time you say yes when your soul says no, you fracture your integrity. Every time you accept treatment that belittles you, you teach your psyche that it is not worth defending. But when you stop betraying yourself, even in small ways, you begin to heal in ways no external validation ever could. You feel it in your chest, in your spine, in your voice. You walk differently, speak differently, breathe differently, because you've stopped asking the world to reflect your worth and started carrying it within you. You are never here to be perfect. You are here to be true. Let that be the sentence that rings in your chest when the old fear creeps in. When you feel the urge to smile through pain, to make yourself digestible, to apologize for your very existence. You are not born to be nice. You are born to be real. And realness is not always polite. It is not always gentle, but it is always sacred. And as you reclaim that sacred self, you'll notice something even more mysterious. You'll attract people who can meet you in your depth, not just your performance. You'll feel more peace in saying no than you ever felt in saying yes. You'll begin to feel the presence of your own soul in every room you enter. And eventually, you will look back on the person you once were, the one who bent and bowed and bit their tongue, and not with shame, but with reverence. Because that version of you was trying to survive. But this version is trying to live. The final invitation, so what now? You sit quietly with the truth you've been avoiding. You ask yourself, where in my life am I still pretending? Who am I performing for? What would change if I stopped? You don't have to shout. You don't have to destroy. You just have to stop lying. To yourself, to others, to the world. Because the greatest act of rebellion is not rage, it is truth. And when you speak it, live it, embody it, you become dangerous. Not in the way of destruction, but in the way of awakening. And perhaps that's what Jung meant when he warned us that being too nice could destroy us. Not because kindness is weakness, but because false kindness separates us from our essence. And there is no greater tragedy than a soul who came to life, only to die as a mask. But you are different now. The mask has cracked. The voice is returning. The truth is rising. And somewhere, deep within the fire of your becoming, you realize, I was never meant to be liked. I was meant to be whole.